On the 12th of April, 1961, a 27-year-old man climbed into a metal sphere just over 2 meters wide and let himself be fired off the planet. Nobody had ever done it. Nobody knew if it was survivable. Not survivable in the sense of the rocket working. They were fairly confident about the rocket. Survivable in a stranger sense. No human being had ever been weightless for more than a few seconds, and Soviet doctors were seriously worried that a human mind, floating in orbit, looking down at the Earth from outside, might simply break. They had a name for it: space madness, a psychotic collapse triggered by weightlessness, and they considered it plausible enough that they did something extraordinary. They locked the controls of the spacecraft so the pilot couldn't fly it. The man inside would be a passenger. If the automatics failed, the only way to take control was a code, sealed in an envelope taped inside the cabin, to be opened only if he was still sane enough to use it. His name was Yuri Gagarin. What happened over the next 108 minutes made him the most famous man on Earth. And some of it was hidden for a decade. Today, we're going back to the first time a human being ever left the world, and what it actually cost to take that step blind. To understand what Gagarin did, you have to understand how little anyone knew in 1961. We had launched satellites, we had sent up dogs, and brought some of them back alive. But a human being is not a dog, and orbit is not a laboratory. Every question that mattered was still open. Could a person even swallow in weightlessness? Or would the food simply not go down? Could they breathe normally? Could the human eye still focus? Could the heart pump blood correctly with no gravity to work against? Nobody had data. They had guesses. And the deepest fear was not about the body. It was about the mind. Every human who had ever lived had done so with their feet on the ground and a clear sense of up and down. Take that away. Put a person in a tiny sphere, weightless, watching the entire planet slide past beneath them, and the Soviet medical establishment genuinely did not know whether the psyche would hold. This wasn't science fiction paranoia. It was the honest edge of knowledge. When you have never tested something, you plan for the worst version of it, and the worst version was a panicking human being alone in a spacecraft with his hands on the controls. So they made a decision that tells you everything about how uncertain this was. They took the controls away from the pilot before he ever left the ground. Vostok 1 would be flown entirely by automatic systems and commands from the ground. Gagarin would ride it, not fly it. But that decision created an obvious problem. What if the automatics failed? What if the ground lost contact and the only way home was for Gagarin to take manual control? They needed a backup. And the backup they built is one of the most human details in the history of spaceflight. They installed a numeric lock on the control panel. To unlock the manual controls, Gagarin would have to enter a 3-digit code. And that code was not given to him. It was sealed in an envelope, placed inside the cabin within his reach. The logic was almost philosophical. If Gagarin had lost his mind, if space madness was real and it had taken him, then, they reasoned, he would not be able to find the envelope, open it, read the code, and enter it correctly. The very act of unlocking the controls would prove he was still sane enough to be trusted with them. The lock was a test of sanity, disguised as a safety feature. And then something happened that no engineering diagram accounts for. The people who worked with Gagarin liked him. They trusted him. And so, quietly, before the flight, at least 2 members of the ground team, an instructor and a senior engineer, independently told him the code anyway, so he wouldn't have to fumble for the envelope in an emergency. The system was built on the assumption that he might go mad. The people who built it couldn't quite bring themselves to believe it. He never opened the envelope. He never needed to. The code, reported as 125, stayed sealed. At 7 minutes past 9, Moscow time, the rocket, a converted intercontinental ballistic missile, ignited beneath him. Gagarin's response, as it lifted off, became one of the most famous words of the century. Poyechali, let's go. He rose through the atmosphere and into orbit, becoming in that moment the first human being ever to leave the world. Below him, the Earth curved away, blue, luminous, whole. He was the first person in history to see it that way, with his own eyes. He described what he saw simply. The sky was very dark. The Earth was blue. He could see clouds and their shadows, and the horizon wrapped in a delicate band of light. For a man the doctors feared might lose his mind, he sounded remarkably calm. The flight was not flawless. The rocket's third stage burned slightly too long, and Gagarin was placed in a higher orbit than planned, a fact that could have caused serious trouble on the way down, but he had no way to correct it. He was a passenger, exactly as designed. He completed a single orbit of the Earth, one loop around the entire planet in a little under an hour and a half. He ate, he drank. He proved, simply by remaining himself, that a human being could function up there. The mind held, the body worked. The great fear never arrived. And then came the hard part, coming home. Re-entry was violent, and it did not go entirely to plan. The Vostok spacecraft came in two parts, the spherical module holding Gagarin and an equipment module behind it. They were supposed to separate cleanly before re-entry. They didn't. For a period, the two modules stayed connected by a bundle of metal straps, and the whole assembly began to tumble. Gagarin spun. The spacecraft rotorized wildly as it fell toward the atmosphere, and there was nothing he could do about it. He simply held on. Then the fierce heat of re-entry did what the separation system had failed to do. It burned through the straps. The modules finally came apart. But now Gagarin was inside a sphere plunging into the atmosphere, and the deceleration crushed him into his seat at around 8 times the force of gravity. 8G. Enough that his vision began to grey out at the edges. He later reported that he stayed conscious, holding on, as the capsule endured forces that pushed the human body to its limit. And then came the hard part. The world was not told for years. The Vostok capsule had no way to land a human being safely inside it. It hit the atmosphere, deployed parachutes, and was still going to strike the ground far too hard for anyone inside to survive. The solution was ejection. At about 7 kilometers up, the hatch blew, and Gagarin was fired out of his own spacecraft. He came down under his own parachute, separately from the capsule, which landed on its own nearby. The first human to reach space did not land in his spacecraft. He landed in a field, on his own, in an orange pressure suit, several kilometers from the machine that carried him. That separate landing should have been a footnote. Instead, it became a state secret. And the reason is almost absurd. The body that certified world aviation records, the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the FAI, had a rule carried over from aviation. For a flight to count as an official record, the pilot had to land inside the craft. Gagarin had not. He had ejected. By the strict letter of that rule, the single greatest flight in human history might not have counted. So the Soviet Union simply left it out. When they filed the official paperwork, they implied Gagarin had landed inside the Vostok. Gagarin himself was required to maintain the story in public, repeating it at press conferences. A man forced to lie about the details of his own historic flight. The cover didn't hold. 4 months later, German Titov flew the second Vostok mission, and when he described his landing, he told the truth. He had ejected too. That honesty forced a review of Gagarin's flight. In the end, The FAI did the sensible thing. It recognized that the crucial achievements, a safe launch, a full orbit, and the safe return of the pilot, had all happened. It revised its rules to focus on those. Gagarin's record stood and stands today. But the Soviet Union did not formally admit that Gagarin had landed separately until 1971, a full decade after the flight. For 10 years, the most famous journey ever taken carried a small, deliberate hole in its official story, all to satisfy a rulebook written for aeroplanes. It's easy, 60 years on, to see Gagarin's flight as a triumph, a clean, smiling victory. It was, but it's worth remembering what it looked like from the inside before anyone knew it would work. 2 days before the launch, Gagarin sat down and wrote a letter to his wife, Valentina. It was a farewell letter, the kind you write when you are not sure you are coming back. In it, he told her he was proud to have been chosen, and he tried to console her in case he died. He asked her not to waste her life in grief if the worst happened. That letter was not delivered in 1961 because he lived. It was given to Valentina years later, after his death in a plane crash in 1968. There was also a backup pilot, German Titov, ready to take Gagarin's place up to the final hours. 2 men trained to the same razor's edge, one of whom would fly into the unknown, and one of whom would watch. The decision of who went first was made only days before, because everyone involved understood the truth that the celebrations later smoothed over. This might not work. The man who climbed into that sphere had made his peace with not coming home. The calm the world admired was not the absence of danger. It was courage in the presence of it. And it did work. In 108 minutes, everything changed. Gagarin beat the first American into space, Alan Shepard, by just 23 days. He beat the first American to orbit the Earth, John Glenn, by more than 10 months. The flight stunned the world and lit a fire under the United States, and within weeks, a new president would commit his nation to landing on the moon. Everything that followed, the whole crude space age, began with the proof Gagarin provided. Not the proof that a rocket could reach orbit, the proof that a person could. That a human being could leave the Earth, function in space, and return, still themselves. Every astronaut and cosmonaut since has flown through the door he opened. The space stations, the moon landings, the people living in orbit right now at this moment as you watch this, all of it rests on the fact that one man was willing to find out what would happen when nobody knew. The doctors feared his mind would break. Instead, he looked down at the whole Earth, said it was beautiful, and came home. And nothing about how we saw ourselves was ever quite the same. We remember Gagarin as a smile on a poster, a hero, polished and certain. But the real story is stranger and better than the poster. A young man was sealed inside a sphere his own engineers wouldn't let him fly, with a sanity test taped to the wall and a farewell letter to his wife already written. And he said, "Let's go." And he went into something no human had ever survived, because no human had ever tried. He didn't just reach space, he proved the rest of us could follow. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to keep exploring the universe with us, subscribe to Cosmic Lab TV. There's a new journey every week.